Good morning, everyone. Test 1, 2. Hello, 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 hello. Now, good morning, everyone. We welcome you to our Bible class hour today. I will, but you can too if you want to. Okay. We're glad you're here this morning. We have a few announcements before we begin our Bible class hour. Remember our teens and chaperones as they are traveling with Dustin from CYC in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee today. Also remember Brittany Sullivan had surgery Wednesday, February 23rd. Prayers appreciated as she deals with post-op. Please keep praying for those people in the Ukraine, especially our Christian brothers and sisters. These are preachers and students that I know personally from spending time with them over the years, and could tell you some stories, but they're some great people, and please keep them in your prayers. The shower for today for Andy and Marcus has been moved to the ladies' parlor here at church. The time is still 1:30 to 3. Okay. Today, Dr. Richard England, right down here, who is Executive Director of French African Christian Education, is going to be our speaker in Bible class. We're very glad to have him today, and we're very happy about the work that they're doing in Africa. Our prison ministry is needing some more teachers for one-on-one Bible studies, and if you would like to be a part of that, please contact Joy Cook. Our seniors and our ladies' Bible class will be meeting this week. And again, the wedding shower for Andy Oldages, bride-elect of Marcus Rommelman, is today at 1:30 p.m. in the parlor. March 6th, this will be the rescheduled safety seminar in the fellowship hall following worship. And I'm really glad about this one. We are finally organizing a new pictorial directory for the church here at Broadway, so we can actually tell who one another are and get to know one another better. Please read the details in the bulletin about when you can get your picture taken. Listen to the daily emails, the Broadway app. The pictures will be taken April 14th through 16th. We're glad to have Dr. England today, and we welcome him to speak to us this morning.
Thank you for allowing me to be with you this morning. It's a great honor to be here, and it's a great honor to be associated with French African Christian Education, and truly appreciate the work that Brandon has done in helping me personally become oriented to this wonderful work in a more intimate way, in a very different way. I first heard about French African Christian Education actually while we were doing a campaign several years ago in the Republic of Mauritius off the coast of Madagascar, and knew of its good work then. And your support, as this report I hope will bring some more of that to your attention, your support has made a tremendous difference. You know, we read in Matthew chapter 5 that we will be the light of the world. You are a light in the world. Now, I realize that sometimes perhaps we don't see that, but you are known literally all over the world because of the good work that you have done, not only with F.A.C.E, but with other mission efforts as well. And thank you very, very much for what you're doing. It was mentioned about the Ukraine. Barbara, my wife, who is with me, we had a great opportunity to do some work in Poland several years ago, and we also know several people in the Ukraine as well as in Poland who are actually accepting refugees right now. If ever there was a time that the world needs to be reoriented, redirected to what God has to tell us about how we ought to get along and how we ought to be and how we ought to be an example to others and how we ought to encourage each other for that home eternal with God, it's now. And as we go through this morning for a few moments, certainly, after we're finished, I realize this is a class, and sometimes in a class I like to stop and say, does anybody have any questions? If we don't have that opportunity, please feel free to ask me anything that you would like. I actually, several years ago, I'm a retired professor. I'm an emeritus professor. They give you the title emeritus professor when they don't know what to do with you after you retire. They put you in the back of the catalog. And I retired after 26 years of teaching at Freed-Hardeman University. And I think I'm officially now an emeritus professor of music and education. And I'm in the back of the catalog. I've been in education for a little over 40 years at various levels, doing various things in education. And I can assure you that this is probably the most fulfilling and rewarding thing that I've ever done in terms of professional work whatsoever. The only thing I can think of that compares to it is the actual work of doing some mission work in various countries. And so for a few moments this morning, I'd like for us to consider what work is being done. Benin is in West Africa. West Africa, as you can see here, is a very small country. It's shaped almost like a key. My wife, Barbara, who was with me, Dr. Barbara England, she is also a full professor at Freed-Hardeman in art, teaching photography. And it's wonderful having her because she takes pictures anyway. And so we have a small amount of photos on a hard drive of various places we've been. I think the last count was about 20,000. And she has, and I'm not exaggerating. I mean, that's just one hard drive. And then about 200 or 300 from our trip recently. We just got back from Africa not too long ago. But you can see where Benin is located. It is a republic. It has been a republic since the early 1990s. In the mid-1990s, it officially began to grant more freedom to teach and to accept different ideas. Consequently, now there is the opportunity to educate children and to educate women at a completely different level, beginning in the mid-1990s, about the time that the Bible Training Center was established by Brother Bill Morgan, Brother Ed Jones, and Georgia Pockabley, who is in Ghana right now. And you can see the location. Benin is an interesting situation. First of all, there's approximately 241 million people who have French as the primary language in the world, and 70% of them are in Africa. Now, many people would think France, Switzerland, Belgium, and have been blessed to have worked in all of those countries. But Africa is a place where this is a primary language, mainly because it's the language for 20 different countries where France actually owned them as colonies prior to their independence. So if you go to certain places, I mentioned Mauritius, the official language is English, but most everyone speaks French or a form of Mauritian Creole. But the reason why it's English as the official language, the English owned it before it was actually declared an independent republic. In this particular area, for want of a better way of describing it, Benin is located on what we almost would consider like our Mason-Dixon line. To the north, you're going to find many people who follow after Islam, Muslims. To the south, in the broadest definition, Christians. And that's a very broad definition. But you're also going to have other various types of religion that are going to be very present. I was talking with George while we were there just a few weeks ago, and he made an interesting comment. And this, again, these comments are not designed to embarrass nor to offend anyone, but we have candid comments when you're over there and you're walking around in the bushes and so forth and looking at things. And we were talking about the different kinds of challenges of doing that work. And he says, you know, there are no atheists in Benin. He said, now we have about 100 different gods, but there are no atheists in Benin. They believe in something, and a portion of that includes voodoo. You may not be as familiar with voodoo, but the primary movement of slave trade many years ago went from Benin to regions around Haiti. And you may have heard of voodoo. We've been blessed to be in Haiti several times. We worked with Sister Roberta Edwards, and unfortunately, of course, her life was taken while she was working there. But working there, actually interacted with some of the people who practiced this very, very strongly. Well, the origins of it are in Benin. And as we were driving around, I would ask George about a certain place and where we were, and he said, well, they're setting up for one of these festivals, for voodoo festivals. And of course, one of my first things is, I said, let's get some photos, let's get some videos. He said, no, let's keep driving. While we were in Mauritius, we went to a temple, a Hindu temple, where they had a 120-foot idol. And I immediately got out. I wanted to take some pictures because I wanted people to see that there is still idolatrous worship in the world. This is a typical street scene in Cotonou and Benin. We flew from Atlanta straight to Paris, France. Now, we drove to Atlanta because I wanted to try to avoid any kind of a difficulty with connecting flights. So you go to Atlanta, you fly from Atlanta to Paris, France, which is a little over 9 hours. You get on an airplane in Paris, and you fly to Cotonou in Benin, which is about a 6-hour flight. I can assure you, all of the horror stories and confusion you have heard about international travel are absolutely true. Everything about it, from the standing in lines, to the vaccinations, to the cards, to the checking of different things. We had to have reams of vaccines, and we had to have the cards to prove it, along with the visa. And even with that, we would be in an airport, as we were in Charles de Gaulle Airport, and the U.S. government changed a particular policy, and we had to make changes in what we were doing while we were getting ready to get on the airplane. And hopefully some of that will be relieved. But once we landed in Cotonou, it was wonderful. And that's a typical scene of going through the streets, of seeing all of that. The Bible Training Center is located in Benin. It is in a place called Zindi, which is about a 15-kilometer car ride outside of Cotonou. The Bible Training Center is a compound of about 18 acres, and it has a wall around it. Now, the wall is to keep some of the animals out, the livestock and other things like that. It also is a secure place. It's a special place. Some would ask, well, do you ever feel nervous in these kinds of places? Well, actually, we felt quite comfortable in Benin, even with the wall around the compound. The wall around the compounds where we were in Port-au-Prince had razor wire and glass embedded in the concrete all around it, and we had to have iron gates with monitors all the time to avoid the possibility of kidnappings or some other kind of bad activity. The wall around this is mainly to keep animals out, but also it is a good deterrent for some others. There is daily chapel. When you go to the chapel there, you will have people who are actively engaged in believing in what they're doing to the extent that they are willing to take the risk of 3 years of intensive Bible study, of relocating their families if they're married to the married student housing, which we'll see in just a few moments, and to begin an intensive 3-year period of study so that they can be prepared to spread the gospel of Christ. These are gentlemen, young men in their 20s and 30s primarily, who have made this decision. And I mention this, sometimes this is a risk. And it is a risk because you have other religious beliefs that do not believe the same way that we do in Christianity. And once you get apart from that in some other areas, as we have seen in the news, sometimes there's going to be the extremes of that. It's very real. And again, mentioning it very candidly, we were discussing this with some of the students and some of the faculty and some of the administration. And I will say this, and it's not intended again to offend, but I was told point blank, you need to have more like the faith in Africa in your country. You need to believe more strongly in what you're doing. These are people who have given up quite a bit so that they can follow after the will of God. There are young people there who have committed themselves to teach at the Bible Training Center to ensure the ongoing nature of the work that's done there. We had an opportunity to meet with them and to talk with them. These are 3 young men who have made the decision to pursue an additional degree so that they can meet the qualifications to continue to teach. They have signed an agreement that when they graduate, they're going to spend the next 10 years teaching at the Bible Training Center. Very, very impressive young men that we were able to be with. This is a slide that I inserted simply because we were having a good time and we had had a long day of conversations, and you will see Kofi and Ajay, the Bible director, and the person also who works with the money. There is a different monetary system, and the monetary system is not like the U.S. dollars. The average monthly salary in Benin is less than $100 US per month. And there are people that we were associated with that make $66 a month. And if you make more than $1,000 a month, you're really making quite a bit of money in that area. The work of George Apocalypse, who was one of the initial founders of this, is under the oversight of the elders of the Benton congregation. George is a remarkable individual who has spent the last 25 years particularly very intensively working to establish the Bible Training Center. He is known in various parts of this country, particularly because of his work in the broad general sense of French missions. When you consider Africa, there is an enormous push in mission work, but it's primarily been in English. And that's the reason why the church has flourished in places like Nigeria and some other areas, Ghana, for example. And you will see the church continuing to grow. Unfortunately, the same thing cannot be said when you have to move into a different language. A friend of mine from many years ago, who was actually a missionary in Switzerland for quite a number of years, Doyle Key, and I were talking one time. He spoke French fluently, except he spoke it with a Texan accent. He was the only person I ever knew of to speak French with a Texas accent. And he made the comment, he said, we have an entire population that needs to be reached that does not speak English. And we need more work and more effort there. George has taken the lead, particularly in Africa, but also other countries, in doing that under the oversight of the elders. This is the chair of the Board of Directors of F.A.C.E, French African Christian Education, which is a nonprofit agency set up so that we could provide the support for the Bible Training Center. And the chair of that board is Paul Johnson. Paul is a retired Major General with the United States Air Force. His mom did quite a bit of mission work in Ghana. Paul has done an amazing work for the church throughout the world in using his position. And again, these are just some slides of while we were there so you can see what was going on as we began to discuss the things concerning the school and the staff that's there. As of next month, I will have been blessed to have been in this position for about 1 year, making a decision to retire from Freed-Hardeman and to accept this position and to go as much as I could. Some have asked me, why did you do this? And I said, well, I think we're supposed to. And I know I'm supposed to. If you're presented an opportunity to spread the gospel of Christ, what does James tell us? To him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, it's a sin. And if you keep the whole law and offended in one point, you're guilty of all. We want to go into all the world. And we have to find a way to go into all the world. And as we walked around the compound, we talked about how can we do better to get into other parts of the French-speaking world. You know, if you have a target population of 241 million and 70% of that population is there within the 20 countries that you're specifically targeting in Africa, you have plenty to do. You have much work to do. And as we would discuss this and we would debate back and forth about what should we do and how we should do it, please be assured that the focus is always on how can we further the cause of Christ and spread the gospel of Christ. In that, there are also some other things that are done to try to assist the church and to help individuals grow. We are the most blessed country on the planet. Now, I have not traveled as much as many of you probably have. We've been in about, 15 to 20 countries. And we have been in developing countries all the way to highly developed countries. And I say this without any hesitation whatsoever. We are the most well-blessed country on the planet. What does God tell us? To whom much is given, much will be required. And so as we begin to look at how can we spread the gospel and ensure the future of the church, and ensure that those that are there have an opportunity to obey the gospel of Christ, to spend an eternal home with God, we begin to look at other things. The Iron Morgan Legacy Fund, of course, to build church buildings, the kindergarten, and also the married student housing. Being a teacher at a Christian school, Christian education, you'll see sometimes people who make the sacrifice to separate their families so that they can be together. And so that one can be educated and eventually they'll come back together. It puts an enormous strain on the family. So married student housing was built there at the compound for the students that were coming for the preacher training school. This is part of the married student housing. These are the spouses. While we were there, we had actually completely unlimited access to everything. And my wife went around and as best as we could, we talked with the spouses of the people that were there, and frequently it was the young ladies who were the spouses, and they also had children. This is a pretty typical kind of scene where you will see things with the families outside, and they're taking care of the children, and they're also grinding the spices or making use of the food that is grown there in the compound. You have to be self-sufficient. In developing countries, and I speak broadly of developing countries, there is a need constantly for how are you going to survive? You know, here, if we need something, we need some fruit or vegetables or meat or bread or whatever, well, we just run to the grocery store. You can't do that there. And so on the compound, in the compound, there are gardens where food is actually grown and the spices are there. She's grinding the spices in this particular one. And as Barbara pointed out, as she was just watching this and smelling it, you begin to realize how wonderful this actually is. Because they are literally making do with what they have, for example, in this example of a kitchen. This is where you cook your food outside, one of the places. This is the modern day kitchen that is in existence right there. Now, we go to a great extreme at our house periodically. We have a small little patch of ground, about 33 acres, and we enjoy cooking out and inviting everybody over. And it's a big deal, and we think it's really something when we drag out the grill and we fire up the grill so that we can have some food. They do that every day. And so what we consider to be quite a luxury is actually the way things are there. But in addition to that, there's the need and the self-sufficiency to be able to generate a certain amount of income. The ladies have 2 vocational programs that are available to them there. One is in sewing, where they can make their own clothes, and the other is in hairdressing. In Benin, as in with many other countries, if you decide to go into business, you have the appropriate credentials. All of the people that have been involved with this technical program so far have passed the national exam necessary to go into business for themselves, and then they simply open up a shop literally on the side of the road. It's a shed, and they go into business. The ladies that are in this training will have their children with them, and you can see a scene there of how they go about class. The children actually are very, very well behaved, and the ladies are doing this so that they can open up their own business that will look something like this, so that they can provide some additional support for their husbands who will be preaching the gospel. But in addition to that, the ladies are also in Bible class, and they're studying the Bible, and they're studying how to teach their children about God's will. We have to keep in mind what I mentioned earlier. This has only been since the mid-1990s that the entirety of the population had access to education. When we go into the world and we teach the gospel of Christ, and in the instance of the Bible Training Center, newborn Christians are given a copy of the Bible, they have to be able to read it. That seems so simplistic, but that's the reality. There is still a very high rate of illiteracy that exists, particularly among the female population that's there. That's changing, and it's moving in a more positive direction. But there is also the need to realize and ensure the future of the church that you have to do more than simply deal with who you're working with today, but consider the children. Train up a child in the way he shall go. When he's old, he will not depart from it. Luke 2:52, concerning Christ, and Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. And that's the sum of his life from age 12 till about age 30, as people would suppose his age. There is a preschool that is there that is leading up to kindergarten. The children walk to school. You see 3 young children here who are actually the children of one of the workers who was there, who's a graduate of the Bible Training Center. And as they go to school, they are met by a teacher in what we call a kindergarten building who is teaching using material designed to introduce them to the Bible. We ran into a problem. As we were looking at things that we needed to do for the education of the children, we discovered that there is very, very little, if any, literature in French and simple enough to use as teaching material for the children. So we had a problem. Well, then you find a problem and you fix it. Our youngest son, who is one of those rugged kind of people that gets out and around every place else, has his master's degree in mission and undergraduate degree in French. His lovely wife has a degree in graphic design and is currently working on her master's degree in New Testament and studying graduate Hebrew, is an artist. And I went to them and I said, I need children's Bible literature. You write the text in French and you illustrate it. And that's what they did. Their work is now being used in other parts of the world. It is available in French as well as in English, and we have a couple of copies that we'll leave here if anybody would like to see it. All of the drawings are original, and they're designed to teach. The artwork is designed to teach because, keep in mind, we're also dealing with the illiteracy of this part of the world. So you have it in French and in English, along with the illustrations, so that the children can learn about creation, which was the first volume. The second is the fall of man. The third that is about completed is the Tower of Babel and what occurs after that, and the promises to Abraham. And it goes on and on and on. As a side note, this material we discovered is also needed in some other parts of the world. We had a group in Honduras who contacted us and said, do you have this same thing in Spanish? And then we've already been contacted, do you have this same in Arabic? And so we will continue to do that and find any way possible to spread the word of Christ, because I want to mention something, all right? And this is outside perhaps the context of all of this. My sweet wife and I have been married 48 years in August. We have 4 wonderful children. We have 9 grandchildren. 1 is already with the Lord, and the other 8 are here with us, keeping us entertained and everything else. I am an elder in the church at Henderson, and have been working with the church since I was as young as I can remember. My father preached full time. So what I'm about to say, you may agree with, you may disagree with, but I wanted you to know the background behind his statement. You don't train ministers, elders, and deacons and Bible class teachers and how to have a good Christian family when you start in their 20s or 30s. You start when they're 3 and 4. Now, you may disagree with that, and that's quite all right. Some would disagree with that, but you start when they're young. Is that any reason why? Do you see now why the Lord said, unless you become as little children, suffer the little children to come unto me, for such is the kingdom of heaven. These children that you see were asked the question in French, based on their studies with the book that was made available, who created the universe? And their answer is, God. Who created the earth? God. And the whole series of questions that were there were pointing back to the creation. That particular innocence needs to be developed, and their faith is developing at a very early age. This is a sample of the type of material that is available in the first volume that they did, and you can see the illustrations, and you get an idea of what the text looks like as they pull this together. We also go to places where the church meets that are very different. This is at an inner city congregation in Contenu, Iglesia du Christ. I'm usually asked, do you speak French? Well, not very well. I speak just well enough to know to be really careful how I use it. Je parle un peu français. Very, very little French. But the reality is that the gospel needs to be spread, even to inner cities in developing countries. And this is where the congregation of the Lord's church meets. In the far right-hand corner, as you're looking at it, is where the children's Bible class is. Now, the reason why I wanted particularly to bring this up, as we sit here, keep in mind there are brothers, sisters in the Lord's church who are praying for you, praying for us, and this is where they're meeting. Then we have an opportunity then to build a building for them, and that's what we're doing. There's been constructed approximately 30 buildings, cost about $6,500. And we went to some of these, and we went to some other places where they were going to need these buildings. It is a place that is built out of concrete. When I looked at the building and I saw it inside, and I was talking with Kofi, and I said, "Are you telling me you can build this for $6,500? And he said, "Yes." I said, "I want you to come to my place in Tennessee. I said, I tell you what I will do. I will double the price. If you can build one of these for me for $13,000 on my property, I'll take 3, or do something." It is a place that is secure. It is a place where they're not going to be rained on. They're shielded from the wind, and they have a certain degree then of permanence that's there. We have to keep in mind that there are over 350 congregations of the Lord's church that have been planted so far in French-speaking Africa, about 250 graduates from the Bible Training Center, and over 16,000 Christians that are there. Brothers and sisters in Christ. And so as we continue to press forward and move toward that calling, the high calling of Christ, we try to keep this in mind. This last particular slide that I wanted to show you has to do with the road and where does it lead to. We are faced with, not only in Africa but in this country, several decisions about who are we as members of the Lord's church, and do we really believe in what we're doing? Do we really deep down believe in what God says? I want to challenge you. My academic career has been sort of like a Forrest Gump kind of a thing. I've ended up in places where I never had any clue that I would end up, and I can assure you I had teachers who'd say they had to have gotten that wrong to have you there or anything like that. And some very prestigious schools, and I'll show up and they'll say, "Yeah, why don't you do this, this, and this?" And I said, "Okay, that's fine." I played the piano at Juilliard and Lincoln Center. I have a degree in music, and that was pretty neat. I always wondered about the people who did stuff like that. And I spoke at Oxford University 4 times on some stuff that I had written, and I thought, well, I know they got this wrong, but I am going to get the T-shirt while I'm here, and the sweatshirt and the hat. And I was in a roundtable discussion with a gentleman by the name of Richard Dawkins, who wrote a book called The God Delusion, Not Believing in God. And in the conversation that occurred, there was about 40 of us in that room around the table, many years ago now, several years ago. He made a statement that has haunted me and haunts me still. He said, "People believe in religion, they don't believe in God. If people really believed in God, they wouldn't act the way they do." And he went on to say, if you need religion to maintain a social order, I'm not going to be opposed to that, but don't equate that with believing in God. What did God give us? Well, materially, we look around and we see how God has blessed us. And I will tell you from my own personal perspective, I am more blessed than anybody else in this room. God has blessed me beyond my wildest imagination, beyond my wildest dreams. God has blessed me. But he has blessed me in ways that perhaps you may not consider it, with family and friends and being places and doing things. I suspect that there are those sitting here that would make the same statement, that you cannot think of anyone more well-blessed than you, because of all of the things that God has granted to you. Even with the death of our oldest grandson many years ago, you say, how could that be a blessing? I want to go to heaven. I understand they've got a river in heaven, and I enjoy fishing. I never got to take him fishing. Maybe they got some good fishing in heaven, because I understand the water is really clear. But even in great tragedy, we can find blessings. Do we believe in God strongly enough to take seriously the great commission that Jesus presented to his disciples before he ascended back to the Father, and go into all the world? How much do we believe in it? How strongly are we willing to commit to do these things? You've just seen some people who are your brothers and sisters in Christ on the other side of the world. You've seen their faces. These are people. These are people just like us. Now, they may speak a different language, dress a little differently, and eat a little different kind of food. Their style of living may be a little bit different, but I can assure you they're no different than the brethren here. They're no different than the brethren in the Ukraine who are having to flee. They're no different than the brethren that can be in Scotland or England or Switzerland or Austria or France or Belgium or Italy, any of those places, because we've been blessed to worship with the Lord's church in all of those places. And they're just like us. But there is also an entire population of people that are in need of the gospel of Christ. What we are trying to do, as feebly as we may be, with the people that are associated with this, the board members, the staff, those that are trained, is to do what God said and to go into all the world and preach the gospel, to baptize those, to teach them after baptism ways more perfectly, to ensure that as much as we possibly can, we can take as many people to heaven with us as we can. There's always going to be something to do. We have to be prepared for the criticism. We have to be prepared for people to say, I just don't get it. I don't understand it. It seems pretty ridiculous. Many years ago, I was teaching a class, and I pointed out that all who live godly will suffer persecution. It's a biblical basis. A person came up to me and said, well, I will tell you I have been a Christian for many years and I have never been persecuted. Well, in my shy, reserved manner, which you can probably guess. I don't know what possessed me, but immediately I responded, then you must not have done anything, because all who live godly will suffer persecution. We're doing something. You're doing something. Thank you. Thank you on behalf of those that are in Africa. Thank you on behalf of those that are here. But also thank you on behalf of those souls that are going to be reached because of the efforts and the support from this congregation. We have just a few minutes, and being a class, I'm always compelled to ask if there are any questions. That's part of being a teacher. Anything at all. I will answer any question you ask on any subject truthfully. You can't pick a subject. I will answer it truthfully. Now, I was presenting at a large southern university in Florida several years ago, and I made that statement to a bunch of research PhDs. They really scare me, research PhDs. But and I said that, and they asked the question, and it was something similar to, well, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, something like that. And I looked and I gave a very truthful, honest answer. I don't know. Next question. So I promise you I will answer the question truthfully. If anyone has any about the work or future plans or involvement. Yes, sir.
How many students are at the school? How long are they there before they graduate?
Thank you. The enrollment normally is between 20 and 30 students each year. It's a 3-year program. Now, the attrition rate is not very high. So as a general rule, we're looking at between 80 and 90 students at any particular time. They are there for 3 years. It is a 3-year curriculum where they study biblical principles. We also, because of the different dialects of French, have to have a course in French so to be certain they'll understand everything that's going on. And then when they graduate, the intent is for them to go back to their village or their home and work to establish a congregation there. One of the challenges of those 90 is that over 50% of them now are married. Initially, they were single. We had a large number of single individuals. But between 20 and 30 each year, between 80 and 90 total, and 50% of those being married. And of those that are married, I would say probably, 60, 65% have children that are there. Yes, anyone else? Thank you again. I believe our time is about up. I'm not certain how long. I could probably go another couple of hours, but I suspected that wouldn't be very popular. Thank you again for having us and allowing us to make this presentation. If you have any questions at all that you think of later, I'll be very happy to answer as best I can. Thanks again to Brandon for everything that he's done and for all he continues to do as we work to do all that we can. You know, when you see the population of 241 million, the question may be, well, where do you start? Well, the beginning is usually a pretty good spot, and then you just go from there as far as you can. But imagine how wonderful it would be to be able to say that you were involved with a work that did go into all the world, and you are. And thank you for that opportunity.